Yeah, so I am Patrick Lorigan. I'm the technical director for Spacecamp, also known as AFRL RVSX. So I've been with Spacecamp for about 4.5 years now, so started back in 2018, really trying to do a lot of the same things that Mando mentioned earlier as far as what Kessel Run was doing, but how do we do agile software development and really bring DevSecOps to the DoD. And so today just kind of going to give a quick overview on what DevSecOps is. We use the terms a lot, but kind of, here's what it is. Pretty high level. Some time at the end for questions if anyone wants to get into more details on exactly what we're doing and how things work. Before we talk DevOps, I really want to get into waterfall and agile. So, it's come up a few times. The traditional model of waterfall had a bunch of stages that you went through. You would completely finish your requirements development, hand that off to a team that did design, hand that off to developers, hand that off to testers, finally deploy it, and then hand it off to a totally different team to do your maintenance, sustainment, those sort of things. That process, as General Paul mentioned earlier, 5 years, 10 years, not exactly quick. By the time you deliver something to users, as often as not in the software world, it's completely out of date. And so, many years ago, 10 years, 15 years ago, the commercial industry switched much more to this agile software development over on the other side there, where you basically are delivering much more quickly. The pace is going to depend on your product, on whatever you're doing. We generally talk about like 2 weeks, but you're trying to get capability in the hands of operators as quickly as you can. And so do that same process, but on a much quicker cadence, get real-time feedback, make sure you're building the right thing, and just in the software world, be much more effective. And so then we get into, when we start talking DevOps, what we're really talking is not developers and operators, we're talking developers and operations, so the team that's actually deploying your tool, supporting it after it's deployed, those sort of capabilities. And a lot of times we talk about deployment. It's not a simple thing, especially on some of these legacy systems. The deployment itself can take weeks, months. You have an entire team that is focused and dedicated just on that, totally separate from your developers. Different skill sets, different terminology, but really kind of the main takeaway here is that operations team, that job is hard, and especially with the waterfall process where that deployment can take a long time. So really what we got was this battle between developers and operations, right? Developers want to move fast, they want to deliver, they want to basically write their code, hand it off, have it deployed, and it's someone else's job to make it work after that, which is the operations. Operations wants a stable system. They want to put it out there, have their users using it, and not constantly be trying to fix bugs and troubleshoot things. Another big problem we have in this scenario is the environment the developers develop on. Often their workstation, their laptop, whatever it is not consistent with the server environment they deliver to. So a lot of times you hand something off, the operations team takes it, tries to install it, doesn't work. This is where you hear, works in dev or works on my machine. It sounds like an operations problem. And really this whole scenario just really does, like it says there, it builds this battle between the two sides. And so this, when you're, here we go. So when you're doing waterfall, you really have the one deployment there. So while that process of handing it off to the operations team, having it deployed, it's a pain. When you were following this traditional, slow system here, you hand it off to deployment. If your deployment takes 6 weeks because there's a bunch of troubleshooting to make things work, while it's not ideal, it's not the end of the world, you do it once. When we're delivering software every week, every 2 weeks, every day, whatever it is, if your deployment's going to take you 6 weeks, that's not really going to work. You lose all benefits of going to agile, and really just long-term, that it's just not a good solution. Moving away from waterfall, this process of totally separate developer and operations doesn't work to quickly deliver software. So you end up with this, the two teams fighting, they have different goals, different things they want. Like I mentioned earlier, they're going to speak different terminology, completely different skill sets, and you really just end up with this battle, working some previous DoD, more waterfall systems. It was exactly this. We on the development side, we built what we were going to build. We hand it off to our operations team, and then they're basically sitting over here telling us everything doesn't work in production. What's wrong? Why doesn't your code work? And it works fine for us. That's a you problem. Figure it out. So that's where DevOps comes in, right? The plan with DevOps is how do we get those two teams to work together throughout the entire process? So let's have the operations team involved with the whole thing throughout. So the operations team is working early on in the process with the developers saying like, hey, our production environment here's what we have. Make sure your application works with this. Every time you're going to push code, it needs to run in production. I can't spend all my time troubleshooting your development issues. And on the other side, developers want the operations team to really automate as much as they can, because again, their main goal is how do I deploy as quickly as possible. They want to be able to push updates, as quickly as they can write the code. They want it out there in the hands of users. Getting back to kind of that agile process, because what makes agile work is immediate feedback from your users. So developers don't want to be sitting around waiting for deployment. So the real point of DevOps is how do those two teams come together, work together throughout the process, and the end result is enhanced automation for the whole process, able to deploy quicker and have a much more stable environment because the developers are targeting that production environment from day zero. So a lot of confusion sometimes over the difference between Agile and DevOps. So this picture just is trying to show Agile is really trying to make sure that we're building the right things, so the developers working closely with their stakeholders, with their users, getting that constant feedback on whatever your delivery cadence is, pivoting as needed, not waiting 5 years down the road, delivering a software capability that doesn't deliver the capability needed, users don't want it, the mission has changed. The point of Agile is to get that feedback constantly throughout the whole process and build the right thing. And the point of really DevOps is how do we deliver those changes rapidly, and how do we provide a stable environment for our operations team and for our users. So that's DevOps. Then we're the DoD, so we weren't happy with DevOps. We had to call it DevSecOps. What does that mean? Commercial companies would tell you that DevOps is inherently already takes security in mind, but really on the DoD side, we wanted to make sure that we really do what we call like shift left of security. So when we're talking about shifting, here's kind of that same workflow but laid out. And you could see there, where our deployment is kind of towards the end, one deployment at the end. The whole concept of shifting left is we're moving that deployment back throughout the development process. So we're not doing one deployment at the end. We are constantly deploying, developing, and shifting deployment along to the left. So here we get development. We've shifted the ops to the left, really. Let's see. Yeah, so ops shifts left and development shifts right, so they're all integrated throughout the entire process. And so that's really just to get us to where on our traditional model, testing is all the way at the end, right? So we go through, we design, requirements, design, develop. At the end, we do a bunch of testing. Same thing in Agile, except you're doing it more rapidly. But on the security side, traditionally, we throw security in that testing phase, right? So if we've gone through any major waterfall program, you get to the end, you do your DT, you do your OT, there's going to be a cybersecurity assessment, maybe a pen test, but it all happens all the way at the end. If you're talking software code, you get a whole big batch of code from your developers, you run it through Fortify, and you say, we have secure code. But you're doing it all the way at the end one time rather than throughout the entire process. So with DevSecOps, what we're really trying to do is shift security to the left. So we want to have security involved the second we start writing code. So we have a bunch of security scans that are part of what we call our pipeline. And so really a pipeline is just, for those of you that don't know, it's just a series of jobs that every time a developer pushes code into a repository, it runs through this pipeline. It has a variety of scans, and all of those scans have to pass in order for that code to deploy. So earlier I mentioned, the developers want automation. They want to be able to get that code out as quickly as possible. The operations team wants to make sure that code is stable, and the pipeline and all the scans that are in it are really how we ensure that. And so if we look at this sample of kind of one of stages that exist in our pipelines, there's actually a series of steps in each of these. But as you can see, the security is built into the whole thing. There's a series. You scan your source code for vulnerabilities. You scan the built containers and your dependencies and make sure there's no vulnerabilities in there. After everything's built and you have it deployed, you run more scans against that software and that build just to make sure that that entire process, that no vulnerabilities are slipping in and that everything is secure. And so if, for example, what we want to show here is if this code, we pushed an update, either the unit tests failed or the developers just forgot to write some tests, the pipeline is going to fail, and then nothing else is going to actually deploy. So we're not going to, if you don't pass all the steps, you're not going to deploy. So that not only ensures higher quality code, which is kind of the point of the DevOps and the stability, but with all the security scans, it's also ensuring that our code is secure. And I think that was all I had kind of on the high-level overview there. I wanted to leave a bit of time for questions. Like I said, that was pretty high level. If there's any questions in terms of kind of what we're doing with that, how we're doing things, and how we're leveraging that for our Spacecamp product teams and also for our Supercoder teams, I'm definitely happy to answer those.